implement. Don't forget, part of your job is implement lessons. Don't think that somebody else is going to, buy the AED, or somebody else is going to mount the fire extinguisher, or somebody else is going to, advocate for getting the soft stretchers. Like, do it yourself.
This is the Wildfire Lessons Podcast. Our goal is to promote learning by revealing the complexity and risk in the wildland fire environment. We share the lessons. The learning that follows is up to you. Hi, I'm Kelly Woods, Director of the Wildland Fire Lessons Learned Center. On today's episode, Wildland Fire Lessons Learned Center analyst Travis Dotson and I visit about some of the lessons we saw revealed in learning reviews and incident reports submitted to us in 2022. Many of the reports and lessons we will be discussing are featured in our annual incident review summary. Find and download the 2022 incident review summary at our blog site, wildfirelessons.blog. Search Incident Review Summary in the search function to be directed to the document. The intent of sharing these lessons is so that we can learn from each other. Listen for new information, action you can take, or for some nuance that you can use to facilitate learning in your sphere of influence. Hey Travis, you ready to talk lessons?
Oh yeah, I'm always ready to talk lessons. Sometimes I think people wish I would stop talking about lessons, but it's my job.
You're good with the lessons. I love that you hold us accountable to being lesson focused. And this episode will talk about lessons specifically that we learned in 2022, or things that were revealed in incident reports in 2022, right?
Yeah. It's really focused around the 2022 incident review summary, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's we at the Lessons Learned Center kind of live in this stuff, and as those incident reports come in, we all read them, and I keep track of certain things, trying to stay in my lane as the analyst. And then as part of the service we provide is at the end of the calendar year, we go through all of that stuff and try to stuff it into 10 pages and have it, distill some of it down, because we know it's not realistic for someone to go and read all 136 reports or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And then sometimes the lesson is in the count, right? The lesson is in, looking at how things get repeated or similarities, that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, today's like the podcast version of what did we discover in 2022?
All right. Well, why don't you start to answer that? What did we discover in 2022? What were some of the key takeaways, some of the main lessons?
All right. I'm going to use the incident review summary as the guide and kind of talk about some of the stuff that shows up there. And the first page has to do with fatalities. It's a tough way to start it out, but it's a recognizable thing. People want to know. We all want to know about fatalities. And so last year, 2022, there was 25 total fatalities. And I think it's fair, to just kind of go into the count, right? There's always a little bit of, I don't know if it's drama or discrepancy around the count. But yeah, as the director, maybe you can describe, the perspective that we take on reporting wildland fire-related fatalities.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting because it's different than people might think, right? The NWCG Risk Management Committee maintains the annual safetygram, which records wildland fire fatalities and entrapments and serious incidents like that. So it's interesting because are our numbers always the same? Not necessarily, but that there's criteria with the safetygram, and for us at the Lessons Learned Center, we look at were they involved in fire activities? some kind of suppression, prescribed fire, incident management at large. This year we had a driver that had a cardiac event at ICP delivering logistical equipment. That person was there, that man was there doing a critical job to support fire suppression activities. So that's something that would be factored into that number of 25. So
Yeah. And to clarify, when you say a driver, like literally assigned as a driver, like that was the position. Somebody was there as a division soup, and somebody was there as a finance section chief, and there was also somebody there as a driver, as we all have experienced.
Yeah, hired by the Great Basin Cache down at Nifsy, driving equipment up to the Four Corners fire, near Cascade, Idaho. And that's the only reason that he was there was to deliver equipment. He was assigned and hired as a driver. So yeah, good clarification.
Yeah, and to that point, you look at that graph of fatalities, the bar graph that just has it broken down by incident type or function, however you want to describe that, and aviation is up at the top. Aviation and medical, we both had 7 related fatalities, 7 in medical, 7 in aviation, and that aviation number stands out because that's not always the lead thing, and then people go, whoa, 7 aviation related fatalities, I don't recall that. And sometimes that comes from an agency perspective, right? It's like, well, because like one of these was a state employee, and somebody might not be tracking on a state employee. And then 4 of them were actually county employees in New Mexico.
Yeah, because these were 7 fatalities over 3 incidents.
Yes.
Yeah.
And 4 of them were in one helicopter crash.
Yeah, they had been doing bucket operations. Yeah.
And headed back, and I think it was a mix of law enforcement and county fire folks. But yeah, they were assigned to the fire.
Yep, that's it. Again, they were assigned to the fire and moving from the fire back to their home unit, I believe is what it was. And that's direct support of the fire.
Yeah, and the reasoning behind our standpoint, is revealing complexity and risk related to wildland fire. Right, and that's wildland fire. That's not, federal wildland fire. Or,
exactly.
You know what I mean? It's just the complexity and the risk related to wildland fire. And so that's maybe why our sideboards are maybe a little more broad, because it's learning in the fire service. That's the way I always talk about it. And as big as that is, that's
yeah, it's a huge diverse audience or group of folks, right?
Yeah.
It is those feds, state, rural, anybody who's responding to wildland fire. If there's an incident, an accident, fatality, that is something that we want to, if we can, know more about. And it's going to be factored into our total data set, whether it's fatalities or something else.
And we can learn from it. That's
exactly.
That's the real thing. Is there a way to leverage some learning? So
I actually think some of our most interesting reports in the last couple of years we've gotten from state entities. There's
Absolutely.
been some very, very cool lessons revealed. So it's nice to be broad, different ways of looking at things, different formats in the learning reviews and documents. So it's pretty interesting. There's a lot of lessons to be had there.
Absolutely. And yeah, we'll get to it in the entrapments, but if we were only doing federal entrapments, we would, for 2022, we would have had nothing to report, which is great for federal agencies. But there were still tons of lessons of these other people that experienced entrapments.
Well, and we'll get to it, I suppose, in entrapments.
But getting back to that first page in fatalities, we had some, the medical events that we often have that number's about average, some vehicle accidents, which is usually there. We had 3 hit by tree fatalities, 3 entrapment fatalities, burn injury fatality, and then one that we don't know. It's just there's not a cause of death that's published on that. And and then the other piece that is always interesting to look at, that we throw in there, is the 10-year line graph of, fatalities over the previous 10 years. So it happens to go back to 2013. Can you believe that? That 2013 is the 10th year. So next year, when I record that 10-year fatality, 2013 won't be in there.
Of course, 2013, that number includes the Yarnell Hill fire there.
Exactly, right.
Yeah.
So we'll see what it looks like. We don't know exactly what 2023 is going to look like. We know it's not going to be zero.
Yeah.
Because we've had 5 fatalities already recorded this year.
Yeah.
So yeah, that trend line is what I'm envisioning, having it right now. It looks level, right, with an average at 17.7, and I think that next year, without the influence of Yarnell in that little picture, that data set, it might look different. But that's just an interesting thing to note. What I can envision is that trend line being a little bit more steep, kind of climbing up, and having people go, "Oh my gosh, look at this, crazy trend of where there's more and more firefighters dying every year," and I think that might be true for that 10-year time period. But as with anything, you zoom out a little bit, and it gives you a different perspective.
Travis, you always come up with some good exercises and questions to put in with the data in the incident review summary. And I'm just kind of curious, what would be some discussion points you think would be valuable for people when you look at these numbers? What are some things that might be something people could talk about that would be meaningful?
Yeah, I guess the go-to one is talking about it helpful. You know what I mean? Like I guess flipping that question right back to the people is like, hey, here's these graphs that people tend to. The reason I say people want to see them is because one year I tried not putting them in the review summary, and we got a lot of feedback saying, "Hey,
we're missing something."
Yeah, and so people want to know, and that's what I would say. Okay, why do you want to know? What is it that you want to? What's driving that curiosity? Why do you want to know how many firefighters died last year and how? What is that informing in you? And is it helpful? And of course the most typical answer I receive is like, oh, well, it helps, reinforce the reality of how dangerous things are out there and how we need to be cautious and stuff like that. And I think that's a genuine answer. I think the other thing I ask people to reflect on is, okay, given all the ways that we see, on this graph, where's your biggest risk? Are you, maybe you're a food unit leader, maybe you're a sit unit leader, or maybe you're a task force leader, or I don't know why I'm only on leaders. But where are you reflected in here? You know what I mean? Like, where's your risk? And the reason I ask people that is because if you don't kind of ask yourself that, it's easy to say, well, the risk is for the firefighter, the person out there dragging the torch or swinging the tool or, pulling hose. That's not the only risk that exists, at least in relation to fatalities, because medical is, leads us almost every year.
Yeah.
And driving.
Yeah.
So where is your risk profile mapped against, these numbers, I guess?
Yeah, that's a good perspective, because what can we learn? How can we talk about this and make it meaningful discussion? And I think that's good advice.
I guess moving on past the fatalities, the next little piece there is chainsaw cuts. That's always a thing people like to talk about, and it does. We get reports about chainsaw cuts every year. But this year there was something different this year. And
Yeah.
I guess I'm saying this year, I should say in 2022. And the thing that was different was that we received more reports about cuts to the swamper than cuts to the sawyer. And since I've been the analyst at the Lessons Learned Center, that's the first time we've seen that.
Yeah, that's it's not what you'd expect, right?
Yes, it is definitely not what we have come to expect based on what we've seen in the past. And so it's a great discussion point. And I think that in itself, it's real easy to just get people going on that. Like, hey, why do you think that is? I think it's fair to inject the possibility that it has to do, at least in part, with reporting. Like we're getting better. We're a better learning organization. And so we see more and more reports in general. And I think that it's possible that in the past, people didn't think to notify the Lessons Learned Center when a swamper got cut. As odd as that sounds, I think that it's possible that that's the case.
Yeah, if we hear about more of them, the numbers are going to be higher, right? Like that's and that's not necessarily indicative of anything other than we've heard from more people about it, right?
For sure. And it's also just as possible that there's some thing happening where
some nuance out there.
Yeah, some nuance where, swampers are getting more cuts than not. And I know that this is a thing where people can take an existing perspective that they already have and use this to fit to it, right? And say, well, it's because ... whatever their pet peeve is.
That's where that curiosity piece of learning comes in, right? Like not making an assumption that, it's kids these days or it's something, right? Like it could be a lot of things. So it's best to study the information that we have and try and make some sense out of it, right?
For sure. And use it as an opportunity. Say, okay, that's great. You come to the table with the kids these days perspective. Have that discussion, right?
Yeah.
Have that. So, okay, like, tell me why. And what are some reasons why maybe maybe it's not. Who knows? But the point is it's a jumping off point for some of these conversations. And it's a great discussion about like, okay, well, what is the right way to operate as a SAW team? What is it that you're trying to do as a SAW team? And what do we want to be teaching people? Because it's obviously involves some risk. And culturally, I know that there's this kind of like reverence for the high performance SAW team, and it's like a dance, and they know what each other's going to do before they do it, and ultimately it's like how close can you get to the bar without getting cut is almost like used as the definition of how good your SAW team is.
Yeah. I remember, when I listened to the tree felling accident analysis episode of the podcast that you and Alex did, I remember you talking about practicing too, like with a chainsaw. The only way to get better is to practice, right? And so how do you get to that fine dance of, being super efficient and super, super close and making it all work in a way that no one gets hurt? It takes practice. But where are you going to get the practice? I think that's such a big point. And when it's interesting, I would invite folks to read the Moose Fire Chainsaw Cut RLS and, think about that, because the practice piece is huge and you got to get practice somewhere. And
practice involves risk. There's people die in training. That's whether it's in the military or in the fire service or, that is a thing that happens. So there's no free ride on that front. And chainsaws are like, it's no joke, man.
Yeah.
And I think bringing it back to that like, what's the intent though? Do we need to be that close all the time? Do we have to have SAW teams that are like, that read each other's minds? You know what I mean? Is that...
and realistically, can you read anybody's mind, right?
Yeah. And to what end? And maybe there's a time and a place where you need that, and then there's And then there's other times where, like, yeah, you actually don't need to go really fast, and there's not a real efficiency gained by being close to each other. Maybe it's okay to go slow sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, these are the conversations that we're hoping to have SAW teams have, and supervisors, right? Supervisors should be saying, look, this is the way we're going to do it. This is how this is what we want swampers and sawyers to be doing or not doing.
Yeah.
And I will throw out there that we have had a swamper chainsaw cut fatality.
It was in California, right?
Yeah, fell and got cut on the inner thigh, and then later passed away in the hospital, but fell into the chainsaw operator. The swamper was uphill and the sawyer was downhill, cutting on something, and he slipped, which I can envision. I can see that happening.
Yeah.
A lot of the chainsaw cuts this year to swampers were on the hand, which is when you ask people, hey, where do you think those cuts were? Multiple, they're often to the hand, but not only, because you can see the one that's pictured in the report. It was to the lower end of the chaps, and then, obviously around the chaps to the skin. So yeah, that's the chainsaw stuff. Up next,
Vehicle accidents. That was
a
few of those this year.
The thing that stood out to me this year with vehicle accidents, because again, it's a thing that comes up often, and it's kind of one of those ones where, how do we continue to have that same message, right? About, like, hey, driving is a dangerous thing. And driving in the conditions that we drive in adds another layer of risk. And I think it kind of gets to that broken record kind of feel, right? I know as a young firefighter, I'd almost roll my eyes when people would say, driving's the most dangerous thing you're going to do, just because you hear it all the time. So the nuance this year was just about visibility. There was multiple instances where visibility was an issue, whether it was due to smoke or dust. Those are the two visibility struggles that we have. And one of them was pretty dramatic. Like, I could totally envision it where they're driving, trying to find a fire, and they're on a kind of like a logging road headed out at sunset, and there's kind of a convoy, multiple vehicles, and it's the moon dust thing. It's up and the sunlight, and they're type 6 is heading up this mountain road, and there's a slight turn to the right, and they don't see it, and so they just end up like kind of driving over the edge of that, which it's terrifying, because I can envision it happening so easily.
Yeah, for sure.
And then smoke, man, initial attack and smoke and an emerging incident, and you know what I mean, like trying to figure out. It's just that chaos time. It's like, man, there's a lot of things that could go wrong there, and we had some of that happen this year. Actually, had a collision between responding resources. Yeah,
it's just, I mean, just as you say with the Sawyer and Swamper, it's just a case of slowing down and seeing where you're going before you go. But it's hard in the heat of the moment for folks. Mm-hmm. You're out there trying to do good work, try and be efficient, and just takes a second of lost visibility. Come around a corner in the dust and the sun exposure's just exactly wrong, and you get a little close to a soft shoulder, and next thing you know, you're in trouble.
For sure. And I think the point that I try to point to in the review summary is there is some curriculum out there, you know what I mean? And there's like, we can practice driving, and we can get better at driving if we invest in it. And it's not something I remember getting a lot of instruction on. I think it's different these days. I think most people go through an engine academy, but if you're not in the engine world, it's entirely possible to get zero instruction on driving.
Yeah, the BLM, I think you're thinking of the BLM Fire Vehicle Driver Orientation, or the BL 300, right? Yeah, and it's It's, as I understand it, it's required for all regular drivers of specialized vehicles, engines, water tenders, crew carriers or buggies, all that kind of stuff. Everybody needs to take that driver orientation and
In the BLM.
in the BLM. I think the BIA is looking at it too. But that's a pretty, if we truly do say driving is the most dangerous thing we do, then it does make sense to put a little time in training people on, the basic knowledge about operating and maintaining these kinds of vehicles. So yeah, good shout out to the BLM for developing that program. And it's been that way for years. I know I took it when I was working for the BLM. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's something that we can empower people just by pointing them to it. So say you work for an agency that doesn't have that curriculum or doesn't require it, it's still stuff you can access, right?
Yeah,
you can
just
go
Google.
Yeah,
just Google BLM driver training BL 300, and I think it's probably on the NIFC website or something. So
yeah, and it's worth, if you do, when I was a engine captain, we had Sunday training day just because nobody was at the station on Sundays. You know what I mean? And we had,
yeah,
and so we would do some sort of training every Sunday. And driving is a thing you can do training on, and you can find curriculum or you can come up with some of your own. And so anyway, that's all. Part of the reason is it came from a report, right? There was a hotshot crew that they credited avoiding an accident. They said, "Oh, that came from the intentional driver training that we invested in," and it happened to be a BLM crew.
Yeah, and they did a great write up. It's very very good write up, and you're right. The training paid off. That was their lesson. What a great lesson.
Exactly. And that's like, oh, well, yeah, it's not us coming up with this stuff. It's a crew out there that said, hey, our drivers were heads up and were paying attention, and they avoided this head on. That was right in front of them with skills they learned within our organization. So, yeah,
that's pretty cool.
All right, moving on. Oh, hit by tree incidents. That was a hard one. I mean, it's hard every year. 3 fatalities, just tough stuff. And and I always break it down. Instances were involving chainsaw ops and which ones weren't. And again, this year there were more hit by tree incidents that did not involve chainsaws than. It's just another one of those things that people assume that if somebody got hit by a tree, it was probably, somebody cutting on it, but that's not always the case.
In fact, in the 3 fatalities, there were no chainsaw ops in any of the 3 of those, correct?
Yep. They were all, trees falling down and, us being in the woods. And sometimes they're fire weakened and sometimes they're not. I know for sure on 2 of these they were fire weakened. And I don't recall on the 3rd.
I don't recall on the 3rd either, but it was doing prescribed fire.
That was a prescribed fire. Yeah.
Yeah, down in California. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then of course we're talking about Big Swamp and Rum Creek up in Oregon. Yeah,
and then the big lesson that is. There were several of them, but this kind of focus on what is required for a short haul site, right?
Yeah.
That got a lot of focus and attention because when they were in the process of trying to get their fallen brother out, there was that realization like, oh, wow, what do we, because there's a generation of us that have come up cutting hella spots. Right, like that's what we envision, and it turns out that a short haul doesn't need that much. I think that's the quote from Big Swamp, right? It's like I realized I didn't know what is needed of a short haul site. Turns out it's not much.
Yeah, Rum Creek had a short haul component, and it's worth reading too. Just the hike, the height of the trees complicating things. I mean,
Oh, that's
it's
right.
just really that's a major takeaway I would say from 2022, at least from my chair, is being familiar with the tool, knowing what, if you need it, knowing how to implement it and get it as quick as possible. So I think both of those are interesting reports to read from that perspective, and certainly heartbreaking stories and outcomes. But there's a lot of lessons, as you say, to consider when working with short haul.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that at least one of them mentioned the utility of a soft stretcher as well, which is something that we've seen multiple times. So yeah, there's some good stuff, and the description, there's a pretty concise video out there, but the description that is being used for a short haul site is the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. That's the way it's described in the video, is about how big, which is definitely smaller than any hella spot, right?
For sure. Yeah.
And the point being, it's ready sooner than you might think, and don't invest that additional time and risk in
Yeah.
laying a bunch of trees down, if what you're planning for is short haul.
Yeah, definitely folks should check out that report and the video associated with the big swamp.
And then the other thing that we kind of point at in there is a helmet inspection. 2 of the non-fatal hit by tree incidents mentioned the helmet, and there is some good resources out there about like determining if your helmet should be in service, and even if it's not by the book, I just think the idea of looking at your helmet and going, okay, at the beginning of the season, like the whole reason why I'm putting up with this thing on my head all season is that if something hits it, I want it to work, right? So
Yeah. I know my helmet over the years has definitely been over a decade old, and some of the guidelines they have, then it's like, geez, now I have a new helmet, but certainly I've been in that category of not paying any attention, just sort of taking for granted my PPE, right?
yeah, it's just something that, it's in your bag, or, every year you just, it's in your locker or whatever it is. And before you know it, it's not going to function the way that you want it to. And I think it's important to take a look at that stuff every so often. And supervisors, again, like, hey, man, like, look into this stuff.
Yeah.
And in the review summary, there's a video that's linked in the exercise section that walks you through what a
How to inspect it.
Yeah, real basic.
What about trees through windows, Travis? We had,
Oh my gosh.
because that's a weird one.
It is. It's weird. And it's the 3rd instance we've had. So we had one of them this year, one last year, and then I think 3. Anyway, we've had 3 of them. I know that. And it's literally that, trees through the windows. And what it is it's trees that have fallen near a road, and usually the tip of the top of the tree is sticking out into the road. I think we've all seen it, right? And it makes sense that trees are falling and people are driving up and down the roads. And 3 different instances, that tip of the tree has come through the window. One of them I think was a cab of a heavy equipment. But yeah, like come through, and this one like stabbed the passenger in the vehicle through the shoulder.
Yeah, crazy, huh?
Yeah, and the one that was several years ago, it shattered the driver's side window, and then went through the seat and out the back window of the pickup, something like that. And the driver happened to be leaning over, and credits that little leaning over motion with having not have a tree go through his throat.
Yeah.
And so what I've been telling people is like, yeah, that's a crazy scenario, but the lesson is when you see those trees, you know what I mean? Like stop and cut the top of that tree off.
Yeah, don't just go around.
Don't just drive around it. And some people say, oh, we should flag it, like that. I mean, I guess that's better than not,
Yeah, if you don't have a saw,
yeah, that's what you got to do. But ideally, especially when you're assigned to an incident, like, stop and take care of that stuff. Deal with it. Because it does happen. Pretty wild.
Yeah.
And then I'll also make a plug for just considering working distance, taking a look at when you're in groups, like maybe you're prepping a road or something like that. We had instances where there's people dealing with small diameter trees and thinking like it's not that big a deal, but then a small diameter tree nails somebody on their crew, and it's scary.
Yeah, you sort of can lose track of spacing in that kind of scenario, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're just heads down, putting in work, and
multiple saws maybe running around you. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then you end up bunching up or getting close, or one instance where you can see how it happens.
You ready to bump into entrapments?
Yes.
We had 12 instances that met the NWCG definition of entrapment last year. And I actually printed out the definition because I think it's always good to remind people what that definition is, because we attach so much emotion in the word entrapment, and for good reasons, right? But I'm going to just read it real quick. Are you cool with that?
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Okay. The NWCG, National Wildfire Coordinating Group, definition of entrapment is a situation where personnel are unexpectedly caught in a fire behavior-related, life-threatening position where planned escape routes or safety zones are absent, inadequate, or compromised. An entrapment may or may not include deployment of a fire shelter for its intended purposes. These situations may or may not result in injury. They include near misses. So I know it's a long definition, but I do think it's always good to remind people. You're super good about reminding people in the analysis products we produce. But if we operate from that definition, we had at least 12. We had 12 recorded entrapments last year, right?
Yeah. And that's a broad definition, and I would say that it, again, revealing the complexity and risk in which is a big part of our mission, and
it is the mission statement, Travis.
It's the mission statement, right?
Yes.
It's not the only thing that's in there, but yeah.
No, it's not the only thing we do, but yes.
And the opportunity to learn, right? And it's just like, it's the definition we have. So that's what I have to go off of in terms of recording these. And where it gets sticky is when, and I think there's less and less of it, but in the past, where it gets sticky is that emotion that you're talking about when an event that somebody was involved with is, meets the definition of an entrapment, and somehow they feel like that's like calling them a bad firefighter or something like that. And it's just like, oh no, we just got in a tight spot or something like that. And
it was just a near miss.
Yeah. Or, the scenario I always use is like, if you were driving out really fast and, had to dodge a few things and maybe you blistered some paint, it's just an entrapment because, your escape route was compromised. So anyway, there's always a bit of concern, but I think it's actually less now. I think, we've made progress, and people understand that.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a lot to learn. I mean, looking at these ones, the stats that you have, 7 during initial attack, 2 while scouting, 1 upon initial arrival on scene, 1 during heavy equipment ops, and 1 during extended attack. Like, that's that's revealing, right? I mean, that's interesting to dive into and have some conversations about those things and entrapment avoidance in those scenarios, right?
Absolutely. And initial attack is where the majority of entrapments, it's always over 50%, whether you look at 1 year or 5 years or 10 years. Initial attack is always over 50%. So that's one thing that I would point out to people. And the majority of initial attack, I would argue, is done by engine crews.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense that, most of our initial attack entrapments involve engine crews.
Yeah.
Which was the case this year. And of those, several of them involved the engine getting disabled in one form or another, getting hung up, high-centered, mechanical failure, some sort of deal
Poor visibility, I believe, was the scenario in at least one.
Yeah, where they got stuck, because of poor visibility, right? They're driving in the smoke. And that's another thing that I hadn't, I've been asking people a lot is like, okay, how do you decide what you're going to do when you're driving and it's smoky and visibility goes down to zero? And of course, the answer is always, it depends, right? But it's like when it's to the point where you can't see anymore, how are you going to proceed? And what are some, whether it's tools or tactics or feeling that ramp up to where understanding your environment in general, right? Like really taking the time to notice what's around you and have really have situation awareness, so that you can make these little micro informed decisions when your world literally goes dark and you're driving and you can't see.
Yeah, and no two scenarios are probably alike, but giving it some thought ahead of time and trying to put yourself in this situation, reading these reports and thinking about that. It's pretty important.
Absolutely, and the team nature of it, and all the different ways that you can contribute. You know what I mean? Like, if you're in the back seat, how can you contribute? Well, you can probably contribute to the tone and tenor, right? You don't have to be screaming or, you know what I mean? There's those kinds of things. It's just putting some thought to it, just like you're saying. Scouting is one of the activities that is absolutely necessary, and the nature of scouting puts you in the scenario where you could be entrapped. That's just the nature of the work.
Yeah.
I don't know how to get around that.
Yeah, we've seen, just in my time with the Lessons Learned Center, that is a definite theme with entrapments. There's a scouting component.
Absolutely. And initial attack is where the majority of entrapments occur, but that doesn't mean that they don't also occur on extended attack, because one of the more interesting events from this year was a hand crew doing a firing operation. And I think they had just linked up the night before. Like they didn't know each other. It was people from a couple different areas, and they went out thinking they were going to do some mop up, and they ended up doing a kind of a high stakes firing operation. And we all know that things change like that. And they were doing this tricky little piece of line down in a little draw, and it spotted, and the crew had to split. They tried to go one way and couldn't. And so a couple of, pretty classic entrapment type situation. And they've got some good.
That's the Vantage Road or Vantage Highway entrapment. Yeah.
Vantage Highway entrapment, yep.
It took place in Washington?
In Washington, yes. And I happened to have the opportunity to talk with some of those folks and some of their experiences and lessons. Just some really good stuff about rapid team building. How do you do that?
Yeah.
And then implementation, that's the thing that they said, oh my gosh, like because they stayed on that fire, and they went out and continued to operate the rest of their tour, their role, because this was literally on day one of their assignment. But they said, we were so dialed in after that, right? Like they were just like, briefing was awesome. And, we had lookouts and you know what I mean? It's just like, and that's
Nothing like having the risk totally revealed to you in one shift to get
exactly.
you.
And then it'll get you lined out in a heartbeat. And we've said that in the past, right? Is sometimes we judge somebody's changed approach, right? Say they experience a traumatic event or a near miss or something like that. And then they interact with fire differently from that point on, right? Because the risk has been revealed and the enormity of it and the reality of it. And but then sometimes we like throw those people under the bus and be like, oh yeah, they're overly cautious now, not aggressive. And it's like, well, maybe they just actually have some real good lessons.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so anyway, that's just a thing we've talked about in the past is incorporating that, allowing for that, I guess.
Yeah. And just it really is a plug for any kind of AAR, right? Like we all have the potential to learn something every shift and apply it the next shift we're out to be better, to be more efficient, to do, be safer, whatever the thing is. We all have that potential on a small scale. It doesn't have to be some really unfortunate, day that's pretty dang scary. It's just, It's always about constant improvement, right?
Absolutely. That's a great way of putting it. And AARs are built for that.
Yeah. And we sort of, we sort of don't use the tool as much as we maybe could, in general. Like I know a lot of people do take them real seriously and go through them, but it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to learn every day.
That's right. I guess the other thing in that, in the entrapments thing was this idea of perception checking. And I think we've heard it in other ways as well, but I don't know how to describe it. I guess it says it right in here. Perception checking with those around you. When you have a pause in the investment up to that point in comfort, right? And how tight you are with your folks. And in many cases, that whole scenario of driving down a road and being like, oh, I don't know, should we try and punch through the smoke and get to the other side? Or should we back up to, that kind of sparse area we had back there? That's a tough decision. And some people might be feeling really strongly about it, or some people might not. But that comfort of being able to speak up is just that you have to build that, just like anything else, through practice. And some of these discussions, might help with that. Maybe it's the beginning of the season. You got together and say, all right, everybody gather up. Here's what I expect when we're in a tight spot. I want you to tell me how you're feeling. Or maybe you don't want that. Maybe maybe you're the type of supervisor that says, I want you to shut up and, buckle up and, follow me. And maybe there's a time and a place for that. But anyway, that's one of the other things that was brought up in those entrapment reports.
Yeah.
All right. Oh man, the lessons, the lessons from the learners. That's always a key piece.
So many good nuggets in there. One of my favorite ones was the nighttime dozer ops hit by tree one. Mm-hmm. I thought that was a well written report with good lessons. Talk about that one.
Yeah, so we've seen these. The scenario was there was a heavy equipment operations going on, and a squatty kind of operating as a heavy equipment boss, qualified as a heavy equipment boss, and it's nighttime, and he's got a headlamp, but he happens to be looking away from the dozer. The dozer operator couldn't see that he was there, and ended up pushing a tree, and that tree came down and just nailed the squatty, and then they had a medical and needed to get him out of there. Did some good stuff there, but the crew that this happened to, their internal lesson was, hey, there's these LED helmet-mounted LED lights available, and we're gonna test drive some of them. And if you put it on the very top of the helmet, then it's 360. Maybe it's a band that has them on the back and the sides. Some way of utilizing that. It's the same kind of technology that the strobe that we've pushed for a while. You know what I mean? Where it's like the flashlight version, where we've had instances where the folks in the helicopter say, well, the only way we were able to see them is because they had a strobe, and it's during the daytime. So yeah, there's some really bright lights out there, and there's a way to put one on your helmet where you can be seen. And to
regardless of what direction you're facing, right?
Yeah, exactly. And to me, it goes back to this bigger picture of, we often think of situation awareness from our own perspective, like my situation awareness, like what am I seeing?
Yeah.
But there's that communal essay, like how am I contributing to the bigger picture? And you know what I mean? Can I be seen?
Yeah.
And that's that, because I talk about it with high-vis Nomex, that's one of them, and headlamps. And then if you really want to stir it up, we could start talking about electronic, surveillance. Like I always describe it as AFF, but for individuals, people get all concerned about all the bad things that could happen. But it's this whole concept of communal essay, contributing to the essay of the group. And sometimes that is revealing where you are and what you're doing. It's the reason why we say communication is so important. It's important to paint pictures, all of that stuff, because there's an individual situation awareness, and then there's the communal situation awareness. And I think one of the maturity points for what we see as people progress up the line in their understanding of bigger picture stuff is the understanding and the value of that communal essay.
Yeah.
Just like if you're a crew supervisor, you want to know where your folks are because you care. And the only way you're going to know where they are is if you know where they are. If you can see them, or they're telling you, or, it's on your phone, whatever it is. So, yeah, I think that it makes perfect sense to put an LED strobe type thing on your helmet.
Yeah. I like the picture you paint of the communal essay. I think is so important that, just because I can see you doesn't mean you can see me. And it takes me back, and probably you too, to when our kids were little and they would cover their eyes playing hide and seek, and they'd think, I can't see you, so you must not be able to see me. They'd be standing right in the middle. That's a silly example, but it is it's an example of how that works. That particular report, I think, does a good job of looking at that and having a pretty tangible lesson to take away.
Yeah. I guess the other thing on the parent side of it, what it made me think of, is when your kid's hiding, and like they're hiding from you, but you're freaking out because like you can't like care for them if they're and it's like, are you kidding me? You're hiding from me. That's dangerous. You know what I mean? Like, don't hide from me in the mall.
Yeah.
It's funny, but
it's kind of funny for me to picture you being in a mall.
Well, yeah, I guess I just aged myself. There's no malls anymore. But I don't know. It's hard to paint that. Did go down that rabbit hole of painting that, being able to constantly tell people where you're at. I think there's benefit in that, and then there's the dilemma that comes along with it, and that's probably a whole other podcast of whether or not we should have electronic tracking.
I'd say it is.
Of resources.
What were some of the other? There's AED. That there was the really good short little read, but that RLS from the prescribed fire AED.
Yeah, super dramatic, right? Doing prescribed fire and done for the day, walking back to the trucks, and they come back to the trucks, and one of their folks is laying there unconscious, and jumped into action, grabbed an AED, and then actually had a pretty solid medical plan, and an ambulance was en route pretty quickly, and used an AED to like bring them back. And so, it's just another reminder. We've pushed on this in the past about you should have an AED if you don't have it, and having them on rigs is a good thing. Knowing how to use them, practicing, and then also checking them. Having a maintenance plan, or some sort of. I actually had to run for an AED one time during a training event, and the battery was dead at a training center.
Ooh.
Luckily, there was another one that did have a good battery, and luckily we didn't need it. But it was pretty scary running, like here's the time that we need it. And,
I think this is a lot like the helmet discussion we had, right? Like checking your helmet, making sure it's serviceable, making sure it's going to do its job if needed. The AED is the same thing, making sure it's serviceable. You know where it is. It's going to do its job if you need it. Hopefully you never need it, right? But it's pretty scary. And, you hear about AEDs in just the general populace, right? Not just our business, but in the general populace, pretty routinely about saving people's lives and, or reviving people to get them to a higher level of care. And it's pretty scary. My cousin manages a restaurant, and she actually listened to our Lessons podcast, and we've talked about some of these things before. And she's, wants all of her staff. They want an AED, and she wants them all trained on it at a restaurant because she's had to do a lot of medical responses, right? And it's pretty. Yeah, you think about where we are, how remote we can be. Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
And we've had success stories in ICP, in the incident command post, and pack tests. That's the other place where we've seen AEDs used in the wildland environment.
Yeah.
Fairly regularly.
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah.
Seems like we had a few lessons with the old UTVs too, huh?
Oh yeah.
ATVs, UTVs.
We ATVs and UTVs, especially UTVs now, we use them a lot because they're very handy. And
they have utility.
That's right. Somebody should incorporate that into the name. But they catch on fire for a variety of reasons. But one of them being that dry grass, twigs, all of that stuff kind of gets caught up. Like in this one instance, it was in the wheel well, I think, you know what I mean, or in between. It's got one of those beds that can go up and down, and I think a bunch of dry grass is in there. And either whether it was the exhaust or just driving near some open flame on the actual fire, got caught and melted it, and luckily they were able to put it out real quick on that one. But then on this other one, the UTV caught fire, and it part of what was burning was the seat, and they had a fire extinguisher, but it was in the compartment that's under the seat, so they couldn't get to it because the seat was on fire. So real super useful, tangible, actionable lesson is, like, number one, have an fire extinguisher on your UTV, because they do, in this business, they tend to catch on fire. And then, mount it or put that fire extinguisher someplace that's going to be accessible. That doesn't guarantee anything, of course. Just because it's mounted on the roll cage doesn't mean that, the fire might still prohibit you from accessing it. But
You have better odds than if it's under
Sure.
the seat, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just have it someplace. I mean, there's a reason why you see that quite a bit. Is it mounted on the side? So yeah, super important lesson.
Yeah.
I feel like and actionable. Obviously that's my favorite. It's something that you can do.
Yes. Travis likes the actionable, like, I mean, we all do, right? That's what we do. But those definitely, you beat a good drum for the whole community, the whole Wildland Fire community on those types of lessons. And it's so cool when people share them with us,
Oh yeah.
in such great formats that it's like easy to kick it out and other people can know. I mean, a good lesson is like, what would you want other people to know doing similar things? What would you tell people? How could they do it better? And right there, mount your fire extinguisher on the roll cage. Pretty good lesson.
Yeah, exactly. That's my favorite. And I mean, it's in comparison to, keep your head on a swivel or don't lose your essay. It's really hard for me to take action on that stuff. And I've said it before. Maybe I'm just slow, but man, it's hard for me to put that into action.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, what would you tell other people? Well, don't get hurt. I mean, okay, there you go. There's not a lot to that. Maintain your essay.
Yeah.
What does that look like? How can we say someone didn't have essay? It's just not measurable or implementable, really.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that there aren't lessons that are a little bit more, or less actionable. I think there's really good lessons about kind of perspective and think about this and, just kind of like
Totally.
that. Think about your contribution to the communal essay. That's less actionable than make sure you have a soft stretcher.
Yeah. And that's what's cool about, I think, the body of work that we, shepherd is it kind of covers that broad stuff, super specific, tangible lessons and some that are not quite as specific, but they're still thought-provoking. They're still going to get you thinking and make you curious and make you, learn something, consider something that you might not have before. So it's nice. Lessons are broad.
That's right. Yeah, that last page, I think the one kind of real instance that I know was a big thing. A lot of people talked about it last season was just, getting hit by water from water drops. And the reason that was kind of a high profile thing was we had a hot shot crew, portions of a hot shot crew, helitanker, was it a sky crane, and really got hurt, like facial reconstruction surgery kind of stuff, like got smashed into the rocks. That was kind of a high profile thing, and it's just kind of a gnarly story. And it just brings up a point that we've all known and been told of just like, man, it's no joke. We got to do our part. Everybody has a part in that, right? Making sure that the line is clear and, giving feedback both ways, right? Whether you're in the air or on the ground about that and that drift, right? And when you get used to, it's like, man, they've been dropping for 3 cycles now in this area, and you start inching towards them, or they start, you know what I mean? It's just, that's how sometimes this stuff happens. And, information sharing, communication, communal essay, like these are the things, whether it's cutting, you know what I mean? That spacing when you're prepping a road, like we were talking about with chainsaws, whether it's that or, coordinating where you're at with bucket drops, like pretty standard stuff in terms of the mitigations we have. Communication, communal essay.
Yeah.
But it's scary. Like, man, facial reconstruction surgery, like that sounds really scary to me.
Yeah. Yeah, the capabilities, like these big water drops, It's not necessarily a bucket. It's a great big tank, and it's got
Yeah.
incredible, gallons, and it's got a huge force coming down. And talking about that, dealing with that.
And I think the exercises we have in there are like, what are some common scenarios resulting in ground resources getting hit by water drops? Like, there's some commonalities, right? And these are discussions that people should have. And then what parts of the aviation-related risk do ground resources have the ability to influence, right? What is it that you can do from the ground to put that stuff on the radar and mitigate the risk?
Yeah.
That's all the things from the review summary.
Yeah, there's lots of good tangible lessons. Lots of good stuff in there. And one of the cool things is the links, that we throw in there. So if folks go in, want to read about anything we talked about, check out the incident review summary and do some research.
Absolutely. Click around on that thing and because the lesson that stands out to you might be different than what stands out to us. Or there might be something that you have a passion for or an experience related to. And sometimes that's the way that we can do that local learning. You know what I mean? As you go, oh man, that really reminds me of this event that I had, that I experienced. And you might use that report, even though maybe a report doesn't exist for the event you went through. You can use that one as kind of a template or a bridge to be able to share with the people, your sphere of influence, the people that you work with. You can share your story through viewing this other event that might be similar or related.
Yeah, absolutely. So. It's a great way to facilitate some learning, and other people, the folks on your crew or your unit or your module that you're talking with are all going to have different experiences that maybe be similar too, and it just gets some good dialogue going.
Yeah, and implement. Don't forget, part of your job is implement lessons. Don't think that somebody else is gonna, buy the AED, or somebody else is gonna mount the fire extinguisher, or somebody else is gonna, advocate for getting the soft stretchers. Like, do it yourself. Step up.
And here's the evidence, right? You've got evidence for why it's important. So
yeah. Be the bridge, man. Like, even if you're you're new to the district or something like that, raise your hand, advocate, test the waters.
Yeah. People can always reach out to the staff at the Lessons Learned Center for some help in finding lessons, producing reports, whatever it is. We're here to help, and so don't hesitate to reach out.
That's right.
Well, thanks, Travis.
Yeah, thank you. This is I'm all about the lessons.
We've done the Lessons podcast or episode of the podcast twice now. Does that make it a trend?
Oh boy, don't ask me that. It's like a whole podcast, right? About what is a trend. We love to talk about trends, but I'll stay off that soapbox.
Until next time, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Thanks.
All right. You bet.
I always appreciate a conversation with Travis. He's like a living wildland fire incident report and learning review search engine. Also, a big thanks to everyone who took time to share their lessons with us in 2022. Sharing lessons is a foundation of our collective learning. I hope you've been inspired to study these topics further, start some dialogue, or to take necessary action. Thanks so much for listening. Thank you for listening to the Wildfire Lessons podcast. Be sure to subscribe, share, give us a review. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Wildfire Lessons. Music provided by second-generation smoke jumper Steve Baker, who always likes to keep one foot in the black. Thanks, Steve. Remember, we honor through learning.